The call.
Shalom, and welcome to The Call. Before we get started, let's pray. I ask you, Father, right now, Yahuwah, that you would open blind eyes. Those who you've been trying to reach for a long time, let this be the straw that breaks the camel's back, that causes them to see the truth as it really is. Those who say they love truth, let them see the truth. Those who are refusing to see, open their eyes anyway, so that people could see truly what's been happening and what's going on now and what the next move is. We pray that your will be done on the earth as it is in the Shamayim. We pray that you begin to protect our people as this transition period is starting to happen. Keep us in your ways and in your will, in the mighty name of Yahushua HaMashiach. So be it. We have a lot to cover, so I won't be playing around with too many slides. We have a lot to cover, but it's all needful. Let's get started. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you are excited as I am, and I hope this causes for you to be even more built up in your faith. We've come too far to turn back now. Let's keep moving, shall we? The covenant and the promise. Genesis 15:1-4. Yahuwah's covenant promise to Abram. Sometime later, Yahuwah spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Adonai, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then Adonai said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir." Genesis 15:4-8. For you will have a son of your own, who will be your heir. Then Yahuwah took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abram believed Yahuwah, and Yahuwah counted him as righteous because of his faith. Then Yahuwah told him, "I am Yahuwah, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Adonai, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" 9-11. Yahuwah told him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. 400 years prophecy. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then Yahuwah said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction.
How long were the Israelites in Egypt? In Exodus 12:40 it says, "Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years." And so because of this, movies like the Ten Commandments will say things like this.
That's a hard dance you do, old man.
We've been dancing it for 400 years.
400 years we have waited. 400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
After 400 years of slavery.
And experts on the topic will say things like this.
The Israelites were there 430 years. We have the record in the Bible that tells about the Israelites going into Egypt and living there for 430 years.
But if you do the math, you'll find that this is not mathematically possible. You see, Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt, his father Amram lived to 137, his father Kohath lived to 133, and Kohath was one of the 66 persons who went with Jacob down into Egypt. Now let's just stretch this out as much as we possibly can. Let's assume that Kohath was a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt. Let's assume that Amram was born the year that his father died, and let's assume that Moses was born the year that his father died. So take 133 plus 137 plus 80, and that equals 350, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt could have been no longer than 350 years maximum. Now more than likely Kohath was probably not a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt, more than likely Moses was not born the year that his father died, and more than likely Amram was not born the year that his father died, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt would have been significantly less than 350 years. So why does Exodus 12:40 say the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The key is found in one of Paul's letters. In Galatians 3:16 and 17, Paul says, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ." Basically, Paul is saying that from the time that Abraham received the promise to the time that Moses received the law, there was 430 years. Well, Abraham received the promise when he entered Canaan when he was 75 years old. Then, 25 years later, when Abraham was 100 years old, that's when Isaac was born. Then, 60 years later, when Isaac was 60 years old, that's when Jacob was born. Then, 130 years later, when Jacob was 130 years old, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So take 25 plus 60 plus 130, and that equals 215, which means that there was 215 years from the time that Abraham entered Canaan to the time that all of Israel arrived in Egypt. Now, Moses received the law the same time that they left Egypt, because remember, the Israelites were living in Goshen, and then Moses led them out of Goshen, brought them through the wilderness, and brought them to the sea. And then God split the waters of the sea in half and brought them into Midian, which is in Arabia, then brought them to Mount Sinai, which is where Moses received the law. And so Moses received the law the same time they left Egypt. So Paul is saying that there was 430 years from this point to this point, and according to the Old Testament, there's 215 years from this point to this point. So take 430 years and then subtract 215 years, and that equals 215, which means that the amount of time that the Israelites were in Egypt was 215 years. 215 in Egypt, 215 in Canaan, 430 total. Now that is mathematically possible, because 215 is significantly less than 350, and that's exactly what the Greek Septuagint says in Exodus 12:40. It says, "And the sojourning of the children of Israel while they sojourn in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan was 430 years. The Samaritan Pentateuch says the same thing. It says, "Now the sojourning of the children of Israel and of their fathers, which they had dwelt in the land of Canaan and in Egypt, was 430 years. Flavius Josephus says they left Egypt 430 years after our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. He's saying they left Egypt 430 years since our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only since Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. So why do modern translations say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The reason why is because modern translations like the New King James, the NIV, the NASB, these are all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic text. But the Hebrew Masoretic text is not the original Hebrew text. The copy of the Masoretic text that most modern translations are translated from is called the Leningrad Codex, which was copied in the 11th century AD. But the Greek Septuagint was translated more than 1,000 years before that in 250 BC, which means that the Greek Septuagint would not have been translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, but rather it would have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew that's no longer around today. The Samaritan Pentateuch also predates the Masoretic text and would also have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew. Flavius Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian. He lived long before the Masoretic text was copied, and Josephus had access to ancient Hebrew texts that have since been lost or destroyed. Paul the Apostle lived long before the Masoretic text was copied, and Paul knew Hebrew. In Acts 26, when Paul talks about his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, he says that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew language, and Paul understood him. Paul knew Hebrew, and so Paul would also have studied from a much older copy of the Hebrew. And what Paul says in Galatians 3:16 and 17 is consistent with the Greek Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the writings of Flavius Josephus. Now the Bible says, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word shall be established. Well, we've got more than 2 or 3 witnesses here. We've got 4 witnesses all bearing witness that the original Hebrew text said that the Israelites will be in Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. But more than 1,000 years later, when the Hebrew Masoretic text was copied, the phrase "and Canaan" was dropped out of the text, and all of our Bibles are translated from this corrupted copy of the Hebrew. The New King James, the Old King James, the NIV, the NASB, the ESV. If you go to BibleGateway.com, you'll find there's 50 English translations of the Bible on this website, and every single one of them say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years, which is incorrect and mathematically impossible. Every single one of these translations are inconsistent with the original Hebrew because they're all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, and according to these 4 witnesses, the Masoretic text copied it incorrectly. As a matter of fact, these ages of Moses and his father and grandfather are recorded in the Masoretic text, and yet they only add up to 350 years maximum. So in that sense, there's even a 5th witness. The Masoretic bears witness against itself. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt was only 215 years. But the years of slavery was even less than that, because the Israelites did not become slaves until after Joseph and all that generation died, and then a new king arose who did not know Joseph. Well, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. Then shortly after there were 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. So it would appear that after the 7 years of abundance, Joseph would have been 37 years old. Then 2 years into the famine, when he was 39, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So based on the information given, it appears as if Joseph was 39 years old at the beginning of that 215 years. Then Joseph died at 110. So take 110 and subtract 39, and that equals 71, which means that for 71 years, the Israelites were in Egypt under Joseph's rule, and they were not slaves during those 71 years. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, and that equals 144, which means that the Israelites were not slaves for any longer than 144 years maximum. Now Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt, and they were already in slavery when Moses was born, which means that they could not have been slaves for any less than 80 years minimum. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, subtract the 80 years of Moses' life, and that equals 64, which means that there were 64 years in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. The Israelites became slaves sometime after Joseph died and sometime before Moses was born, sometime within that 64-year time period. Now let's just assume that the Israelites became slaves at exactly the midpoint in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. That would be 32 years after Joseph died and 32 years before Moses was born. If this is the case, then that would mean that the Israelites were slaves for 112 years. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in slavery was probably about 112 years or so. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but definitely no more than a maximum of 144, and definitely no less than 80 years minimum. Whatever the case, the Israelites were definitely not slaves for nearly as long as the movies make it sound when they say,
400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
The Israelites were not slaves for 400 years. They were only slaves for about 112 years or so, plus or minus 32 years. 115 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, subtract the 80 years of Moses' life, and that equals 64, which means that there were 64 years in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. The Israelites became slaves sometime after Joseph died and sometime before Moses was born, sometime within that 64-year time period. Now let's just assume that the Israelites became slaves at exactly the midpoint in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. That would be 32 years after Joseph died and 32 years before Moses was born. If this is the case, then that would mean that the Israelites were slaves for 112 years. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in slavery was probably about 112 years or so. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but definitely no more than a maximum of 144 and definitely no less than 80 years minimum. Whatever the case, the Israelites were definitely not slaves for nearly as long as the movies make it sound when they say,
400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
The Israelites were not slaves for 400 years. They were only slaves for about 112 years or so, plus or minus 32 years. But doesn't Genesis 15:13 say that they'll be enslaved 400 years? No, it doesn't. It says they'll be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. You see, Genesis 15 does not say the Israelites will be enslaved in Egypt 400 years. It says Abraham's seed will be enslaved and mistreated in a land not their own 400 years. Canaan was a land not their own. Egypt was a land not their own. Isaac was Abraham's seed. Jacob was Abraham's seed. The multitudes in Egypt were Abraham's seed. Isaac was mistreated in Canaan. Genesis says that Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was scoffing at Isaac. Paul says in Galatians that the son who was born according to the flesh, who was Ishmael, persecuted the son who was born according to the Spirit, who was Isaac. Paul says that Ishmael persecuted Isaac. So Isaac, Abraham's seed, was persecuted or mistreated in Canaan, a land not his own. Abraham's seed was mistreated in a land not his own. From the time that Abraham received the promise to the time that Moses received the law, there was 430 years according to Galatians 3:17. 25 years after Abraham received the promise, that's when Isaac was born. That takes it down to 405 years. Now Genesis says that Ishmael scoffed at Isaac on the same day that Isaac was weaned. Well, according to the Jewish Agency for Israel, in Talmudic times, it was the custom to celebrate the child's weaning anytime from 18 months to 5 years. It goes on to say that according to Rabbi Joshua, a child should be allowed to nurse up to the age of 5. Well, if Isaac was weaned at 5 years of age, and Ishmael began to persecute Isaac on the same day that Isaac was weaned, then that would take it down to exactly 400 years. Abraham's seed was mistreated in Canaan. Abraham's seed was mistreated in Egypt. Abraham's seed was enslaved in Egypt. Abraham's seed was enslaved and mistreated in a land not their own 400 years. You see, when you take the prophecy in Genesis and you match that up with the timeline in Exodus, then you're able to understand how these puzzle pieces fit together. But the main thing that causes people to misinterpret this prophecy in Genesis is the Hebrew Masoretic text has dropped the phrase "and Canaan" out of the text. This is the main thing that causes people to believe that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years. But the truth is, they were in Egypt for only half that time, for 215 years. According to the documentary Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, the Israelites' arrival in Egypt was around 1665 BC, and the Exodus took place at about 1450 BC. This means that the Israelites were in Egypt for 215 years. This is the only thing that the archaeological evidence supports. The evidence does not support 430 years in Egypt. This is the reason why it's important to understand biblical history correctly first, in order to correctly understand how it correlates with Egyptian history and archaeology.
Nice. By Nathan Hoffman, huh? But see, I even came at Nathan and told him, well, Nathan, that was nice. I love the math that you proved that our ancestors was not in Egypt for 400 years. Meaning the prophecy was not fulfilled in that Egypt, if you will. But there is some particulars that he kind of overlooked. And I expect that. When we start bringing in things like rabbi, where Yahushua HaMashiach says, do not call any man, rabbi or father on the earth. Which means, oh, great mighty teacher, when you start bringing in stuff like that in the Talmudic thing, you are going to have some problems. But there's one thing inside of that 400-year prophecy, all right, where Abba said to him, all right, Abraham or Abram, this is what's going to happen to your people. Oh, but wait a minute. You'll be long dead before it happens. So, anything that takes place with Ishmael and Isaac at the time of Abraham doesn't count. Because father is either true or he's not true. He saw the dread or these bad things about to start taking place on his people. And father reassures him it's going to happen. But guess what, Abram? You're going to live to be a ripe old age. And you're going to die. You're going to leave earth before any of these things take place. So that 200 and so whatever calculations that he brought up for Ishmael and Isaac, just by the preference of those scriptures alone cancels out what he was trying to say about Ishmael and Isaac. I just want to put that in. So anyone who see this video, don't start thinking awkwardly like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. But then y'all will be calling Yahuwah, our Abba, a liar. And the fact that he had to go to another people to find out the tradition of it is funny. We're going to bring that stuff up later on in this video. Let's keep it rolling. Genesis 15, 17 and 21. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking pot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So Yahuwah made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River, the land now occupied by the Kenizzites, the Kadamites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgasites, and Jebusites. It's a lot of sites, a lot of ikes. Yikes. Now, do y'all see this? This is nothing what they show when they talk about the land. This is what they show when they talk about the land. This is Israel right here. But this, all of this is the land. Not this. This is like a little small swimming pool in a big, gigantic castle or mansion. Huge. Look at all this. The border of Egypt. Compared to this. Border of Egypt to Euphrates River. Look how huge this land is. But if they only claiming this land, then that means real estate has taken place everywhere else. And they have divided the lands. Maybe these people here have divided the land, sold the land to other people around them where it was not theirs, or was it theirs to give away? We'll learn more about that as the video progresses. Let's keep it moving. All right, so this is the lies to cover up a true people. Let's get it. Israel falls to the Assyrians. That's what they say, right? The Syrian invasion meant the end of Jewish people in Israel. Israelites from Canaan were never heard from again and became known as the 10 lost tribes. That's how they're going to put that, right? The Assyrians prepared to conquer Judah. How did the Assyrians control the conquered population of Israel? All right. So this is what they're putting down in history, right? But where is Assyria? Let's see this. Israel captivity in Assyria. Where is it? Syrians take Israelite into captivity. Babylonians took Judah into captivity. Assyrians took the Gentiles. Assyrians take Gentiles to fill Israel. So some people is being taken out and some people are being put in to fill it. Just want to put that in there. Here it is in the Middle East, right? This, hold on, let's circle this or highlight that. This is Assyrian expansion, right? That's Assyria, all right? This is it. Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Lebanon, all right? Let's keep it moving. All those things is in the Middle East, but we need to look at some things. Deuteronomy 28, 49, and 50. What does it say? Yahuwah will bring a distant nation against you from the end of the earth. End of the earth. And it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand. A fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect for the old and no pity for the young. We're going to visit that again. Look up the meaning of distant. All right, here we go. We got far away in space or time. Distant parts of the world. Far away, far off, far, remote, out of the way. Outlining, abroad. You get the point. The star is 30,000 light years distant from the earth. I'm saying it this way because you're going to grab hold of it later on as the video progresses. Let's go. The distant definition continued to show you more. Not closely related. A distant cousin. People understand that. Aloof. Detached. Unapproachable. Standoffish. Understand? All right. Still continued. All right. All right. Now, let's look at this. Is Assyria distant from Israel? No. So, let's look at this again. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 49 through 50 says what? Yahuwah will bring a distant nation against you from the end of the earth. And it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand. A fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect for the old and no pity for the young. Definition for the word end. All right. We have to do this to show people the word means what it means. The final part of something, right? The end of the year, conclusion, termination, ending, finish, close, resolution, climax. All right. The furthest or most extreme part or point of something. Let's see something. Extremity, furthest most part. Limit. We get somewhere. Margin. Edge. Border. Boundary. Now, all of the captivities of Israel were all close by. None of them were from borders. They were all within the proximity of Israel. Let's go. So here's the Middle East map. All right. Let's look at it. We got Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia. They're all still within each other's territory. And here go Israel right here. And this right here is all like Assyria right here. So how far is Assyria to Israel? It's right there in the middle. It's not a long travel. So the Middle East map shows this is not the end of the earth for those who live here. So what they try to say back then on that one slide saying that the Assyrians took over Israel, whatnot, and that's why you never heard from them again, and they became the 10 lost tribes. Yeah, okay. All right. So Yahuwah doesn't lie, right? Numbers 23 and 19. El is not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? This is from the Brenton Septuagint, Holy Name Restored King James Version. All right. Yahuwah is not a man that he should lie, so his word is always accurate, regardless of mistranslations. Yahuwah made sure that everyone who would print a Bible or change any text, that they would keep certain texts intact to bring his people back at his appointed time. Deuteronomy chapter 28, 49 to 50. I told we're going to keep looking at this. Yahuwah will bring a what? Distant nation. We just looked at what distant means. Against you from the what? End of the earth. And it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand. Did we understand Assyrians who live close by us? But of course we did. They were family. A fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect for the old and no pity for the young. Now, who is the nation from the end of the earth? The nation must come from the what? End of the earth. Since Yahuwah doesn't lie, let's take a look to see who are the nations at the end of the earth. Who is at the other end of the Middle East? All right, so here is Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Turkey. Now, who will be at the end of the earth? We got United States of America, Canada, Alaska, Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia. All right. Now, when you go in here, there is breaks in this. It's separated by waters. Over here you have Kakistan, which would be like, and you know what I'm saying, which would be like almost like Mongolia, right? I mean, will be like Khazaria. All right. Then you got the Ukraine right here, right? Then you have Italy all the way over here, France over here, Spain over here. These are all at the end of the earth. Look at this. There's nothing after this. Spain is right here. There's nothing here. France here. Nothing here. Italy here. There's nothing there. And it's divided by a sea. See? These will be considered end of the earth. Borders. America will be currently the end of the earth. It's not close by. So anything over here, we'll see. This is not the end of the earth. It's close by. Let's go. So the end of the border are, so the end of the earth are what? Borders of the earth. Again, like we said here. Spain's a border. Italy's a border. France a border. Turkey's a border. All these different things will be borders. Well, actually not Turkey, because it connects into, this is Middle East, not Turkey. So this right here will be where Israel would be at, right in here. Israel will be in here. These are not borders, but there's dividing waters right here, which will be, so Turkey will be the end right here. But over here is a whole nother place, if that makes sense. So Italy, France, Spain, all these are directly straight across from the Middle East. And then you got over here America, who's way across the other earth, way part of the other side of the earth. Let's keep going. See what history records. So true Israel, please stand up. All right. True Israel, please stand up. Let's go. Truth is not biased, it's absolute. So we have to look at those who contend to be Yah's chosen people as well. This cannot be one-sided. All sides must be brought forth and examined through scripture. So now we will look at those who the world sees as Yah's chosen people first. Where did a plight take place? Where was the residence at the said attack or beginning of the Holocaust? Was the nation who attacked them from the end of the earth? Let's look further to find out. All right. So what the world says. Holocaust, Hebrew, Sha'ol, which is catastrophe. Yiddish in Hebrew, Herben, destruction. The systematic state-sponsored killing of 6 million Jewish men, women and children, and millions of others by Nazi Germany and its collaborators during World War II. The Germans called this the final solution to the Jewish question. Yiddish-speaking Jews and survivors in the years immediately following their liberation called the murder of the Jews the Herben, the word used to describe the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the destruction of the second temple by the Romans in 70 CE. This is gotten by Michael Brennebaum from the Encyclopedia Britannica. All right. Now, what I want you to look at is this. It's European history. Now, I'm just going to say it right here. Shem was not European. He was Shemitic, not European. But here it is, right here. They getting sloppy with their stuff. It's categorized as European history. Let's go. So the best way to let the truth be known is to let people speak on their own behalf. I want you to take heed and listen to every single word that's said. So those who are Christians, those who are not Christians, those who are all different walks of life, take a listen to what they themselves say about the Holocaust. I'm not going to say nothing about it right now. I'm going to let them speak. You shall know them by the fruits that they bear. So let's see the fruit that they bear. Let's go.
Nazi practices included a systematic removal of all Jewish influences. Jewish businesses were marked and patrons were discouraged from entering. Irene's father lost his lumber business because it was seized outright by the Nazis with no compensation. Jewish citizens were suddenly forced to prove their citizenship in Hungary. To prove it, they had to have Nazi-approved documents, and the Nazis made those documents difficult to obtain. Jews who couldn't prove Hungarian citizenship were deported.
Even though my parents and grandparents were citizens, they put in every kind of handicap possible. My father actually spent a lot of time trying to acquire that by going from office to office and paying for everything, and eventually he got the paper. It was, I remember, they were almost celebrating. He came back with that paper. Okay, we're safe. Every step of the way, from the time this happened until we ended up in Auschwitz, we always rationalized for the better, always thinking that okay, it's getting worse, but we see some light. People just can't accept the worst. And so here we had this paper and we're safe. Except don't show yourself in the street, don't get involved with the law in any way because they won't protect you. Nobody was safe. Even school kids, the younger ones than in high school, say, I have my rights. You hear that in classroom. Well, what if you don't have any rights? And the police are on the other side. They don't protect you. They stand by while people do you harm or take out anything from your home. It's a very difficult concept that we were guilty of something. We were guilty of being alive just by virtue of being a Jew. You were hunted.
Wow. Did y'all hear that? Did you hear where it started? Oh, we ain't finished. Not by a long shot. We just getting started. So, we got another video. We're going to let them speak again on their behalf. Let's go. How the Holocaust began. By their fruits, you will know who they are. Again, they speak.
Do you know how the Holocaust started? After the Russian Revolution, when the Russians took over Ukraine, they took over Breslov and Uman, all the Breslover boys were. And they said, no more Hasidim, no more Judaism, and the Hasidim. They chased them all away. So the Breslover boys from Uman and Breslov, they went across the border to Poland. And they all registered, they went in together, a block of boys together, into Reb Meir Shapira's yeshiva in Lublin. And that's why a lot of the Breslovers today, they're Ger Hasidim, because they learned in Poland. In fact, in Ashdod, we have Ger Hasidim, there's 10 Ger Hasidim with the Rebbe Nachman grandchildren. The grandchildren of Shimshon Barsky, who comes from Rebbe Nachman. Yeah. Okay. So, the Ukrainian boys, they found shelter, spiritual shelter in Lublin in Poland. Now, what did the Breslover boys do? They said, we have to keep up our tradition. They had a 24-hour vigil of personal prayer to be able to do. They davened for Klal Yisrael. They had a chain. 24 hours all the time. There was 24 hours. Why? Because Rabbi Nachman told Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Naphtali, his two closest Talmidim, to all the Hasidim, why are you letting the kings and the paritzes and people make bad decrees on Klal Yisrael? So Rabbi Natan said, no, what is Rabbi? I'm letting them? He said, no. When you speak to Hashem, Hashem is busy listening to you, and Hashem's not decreeing bad decrees. So from that they knew the wings of war. This was after already 1933 and after Nuremberg, the Nuremberg laws. Well, the Breslauer boys in Lublin, 24 hours a day, someone was always talking to Hashem. Well, when the first Gestapo came into Poland, they went to Lublin, and they caught one of the Ukrainian boys. They didn't have a proper Polish passport. They fled from the Ukraine. They didn't have a proper Ukrainian passport, and they put him in jail. And as soon as he got put in jail, the whole mishmar, the vigil, it dropped. And that particular day was September 19th, 1939, when Shoah, Holocaust started. You know, when the Breslauer vigil in Lublin Yeshiva, it was canceled. The chain was broken. That's when the Holocaust started. So we know.
All right. Now, we're not trying to dog the Holocaust, but now we're going to see exactly where the Holocaust began. We already heard what he said, September, 3rd, 1943. Okay, so we're going to, or 1930, I think 1939, I'm not sure. All right, but we're going to see where it started at. We're going to look at the areas where it started at. We have to. Before then, we have to take a little side road because this is going to be real good to see. So we got the Rothschild, here we got the Jewish noble banking family. And here we have the emblem for the so-called Jewish people, or for the Jewish people, if you will. We can't say so-called yet until we prove that they're not. Let's go, shall we? Right. So the Star of David deception. You see this? Whose name is this? Prince Henry the Navigator chapter. Huh. And here's the star right here. Oh, look at this. The star again. So anyone who's saying this is the Star of David is a misnomer. They're wrong. So the real power behind the United States is the Rothschilds banking family, which can trace its roots to 1743. Goes a little bit further, don't it? When Moses, Amishel, Bauer put the red hexagram above his doorway. So where they get it from again? They said our king, King David? Doesn't make sense now, does it? Now you know the real history behind it. Let's go. It's the bank crest. This star is literally the bank crest that's on every dollar. The points are there. See this right here? The bird. This fits in perfectly at the different points. You ain't got to make it fit. It just does. See this right here? The flag. Here it is again. This is literally the bank crest. For the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. Right here is the field Negroes versus the house Negroes. What they holding up right here? The rock, right? Who's this right here? Jay-Z. The rock, right? Meaning they did what? They sold out. So J-Bo, just like his song, this means sold out. So when you see artists, actors, politicians, anyone at any time throwing up this sign, that means you have sold out. You are brotherhood. You are no longer part of the liberators. You're no longer a part of freedom. You're no longer a part of, you are selling out Israel. If you are a Gentile, you are selling out your own people. Whomever is throwing this up, you are in bed with the bankers. This is what this means. We're in bed with the bankers. They're the ones who pay our bills. Let's look at this even further.
Germany won the First World War by 1916 without a single shot being fired on German soil. British convoys were blown out of the Atlantic by German subs, the French army mutinied, and the Russian army was defecting. With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. Because of overwhelming opposition to the war, Wilson invoked the draft and passed the Espionage Act, forcing Americans to fight or be thrown in jail. Billions of U.S. taxpayers' money was delivered to the British war machine, money that was never repaid. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
In 1917, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
With the fall of Nazi Germany, the Rothschilds wasted no time waving their Balfour Declaration at the British government and reminding them of their written promise to give them Palestine. But how could the British promise the Arab land of Palestine to the Jews? In 1917, the British parachuted free opium and hashish to the Turkish troops and stole Palestine from them.
One ingenious stratagem was to parachute hashish and opium to the Turkish troops to try to keep their mind off the fighting. Allenby's strategy worked brilliantly.
During World War II, the British needed Arab oil and signed an agreement with the Arabs which forbid Jewish immigration into Palestine. Then at the end of the war, the British broke their agreement with the Arabs and allowed the Rothschild Jewish Zionists to smuggle hundreds of thousands of Jews from around the world into Palestine. To win public support, the Rothschilds, who owned Reuters and the Associated Press, bombarded their media empire with images of homeless Jewish Holocaust refugees crowded together in ships off the coast of Palestine. On October 24, 1945, the bankster pirates gave birth to their most powerful weapon of global control, the United Nations. According to plan, the British pulled out of Palestine and gave the land to the Jewish Zionists. These Zionist extremists call themselves God's chosen race of people and believe they have a God-given right to the land of the Palestinians. It is important to know that the land now called Israel was originally called Canaan in ancient times. Canaan was populated by the Canaanite people who were the ancestors of today's Palestinians imprisoned in refugee camps in Israel. About 3,500 years ago, the Semitic Hyksos kings ruled Egypt for 100 years, but were expelled from Egypt into Canaan. The Egyptians called these Hyksos people the Habarus, which means Hebrews. These expelled Hebrews invaded and conquered the land of Canaan and changed the name of the land from Canaan to Israel. In 135 AD, the name was once again changed to Palestine after the Romans conquered the land. In 1948, the Bankster-controlled United Nations officially turned Palestine into the Zionist State of Israel. To deal with the millions of Palestinian residents, the Israeli Jews massacred and drove them from their villages and homeland. The Jews herded the Palestinians into two separated regions called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Rothschilds soon began financing Jewish Holocaust refugees to build illegal Jewish settlements on Palestinian land. These illegal Jewish settlements set the stage for Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's reign of terror against Palestinians who dared to defend what was left of their stolen homeland. Like Saddam Hussein, Sharon violated dozens of UN resolutions by using hundreds of tanks and American-supplied gunships and planes in an unrelenting campaign of bombing, murdering, bulldozing, starving, and terrorizing the Palestinians off of what remained of their land. In violation of international law, Israel also secretly developed over 100 nuclear weapons of mass destruction capable of vaporizing the entire Middle East. Defenseless against Israel's US-backed military and media campaign, the Palestinian Muslims fought back with sticks and stones and suicide as their only means of defense against the wholesale theft of their ancient homeland. The story of the Bible was written by Hebrew Jews who tell us that the Hebrew Jews are God's chosen race of people. Bible prophecy predicts that they will one day rule the world from their temple throne in Jerusalem, and that the world's King of Kings will be a descendant of King David and King Solomon of Israel. That is what Bible believers all over the world believe will come to pass. To turn this Bible prophecy into a reality would demand the cooperation of world leaders. It would also mean building a third temple in Jerusalem over the ancient ruins of King Solomon's temple. But there is one giant-sized problem. A sacred Muslim shrine called Dome of the Rock was already built on top of the ruins of Solomon's temple in the 7th century. It still stands majestically today in the heart of Jerusalem, and it would have to be destroyed. Since Israel is surrounded by not-so-friendly Muslim nations, and with millions of Muslim Palestinians living in Israel's West Bank and Gaza Strip, this Bible prophecy is impossible to fulfill. Or is it? Like a screenplay for a movie, the Bible story was written by Hebrew Jews. But who is the director and the producer? Is it God? Or is it a special interest group of the world's wealthiest men? The Rothschilds, whose friend companies had helped finance Hitler and the Jewish slave labor camps, had turned Jewish Holocaust victims into victimizers. Imprisoned inside barbed wire refugee camps, the Palestinians began to resemble the victims of Nazi concentration camps. According to author Simon Schama, the Rothschilds own 80% of the land of Israel. Even the flag of Israel flies the hexagram symbol from from the Rothschild family's red shield. The hexagram has 6 points, 6 triangles, and 6 sides on the central hexagram. The numbers 666 are associated with the biblical prophecies that predict an apocalyptic Third World War. The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They control the LBMA, London Bullion Market Association, where 30 to 42 million ounces of gold worth over $11 billion are traded daily. The Rothschilds earn millions weekly just on transaction fees alone. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility in the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Although Evelyn Rothschild looks like a harmless gray-haired old man, make no mistake about it, Rothschild and his ancestors have handpicked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, and sponsored the mass murder and impoverishment of millions. The wealth hoarded by this one family alone could feed, clothe, and shelter every human being on earth.
Wow. Did you hear that? Before the Holocaust, there was already something afoot. The Holocaust was a part of the grand scheme of things, but it was already something in motion, already something at play. So we will continue to look at what the previous video said, where they were when everything took place. It's about to get gooder. All right. Now, you can't serve Yah and Mammon. All right. Now, that was said by Yahushua, right? So, in the Rothschild family is a wealthy Jewish family descending from Mayor Amschel Rothschild, 1744 to 1812, a court factor to the German landgraves of Hesse, Kassel, in the free city of Frankfurt, Holy Roman Empire, who established his banking business in the 1760s. Unlike most previous court factors, Rothschilds managed to bequeath his wealth and establish an international banking family through his 5 sons, who established themselves in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. The family was elevated to noble rank in the Holy Roman Empire and the United Kingdom. We just saw how that came about, how the United Kingdom was birthed. During the 19th century, the Rothschilds family possessed the largest private fortune in the world, as well as in modern world history. The family's wealth was divided among various descendants, and today their interests cover a diverse range of fields, including financial services, real estate, mining, energy, mixed farming, wine making, and nonprofits. The Rothschilds family has frequently been the subject of conspiracy theories, many of which have anti-Semitic origins. Yeah, we're going to see if it's anti-Semitic at all. Right. So with Yah, the greatest treasure for Yah's people would be him, not money. But the opposite of those who would not be Yah's people, theirs would be the opposite of Yah. It would be money. Just want to put that in there real quick. So let's look at the places they named in the previous video, right? Let's look at it. They said what? Germany. They was there in Germany. We heard Hungary, Romania, the Ukraine, Poland was another one named in the video, and yeah, maybe even Italy. I think Italy was there as well. All right, so these are the places they named: Germany, Italy, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Ukraine. Now, what was the thing that they said? They said that they had to produce papers, right? That all of a sudden their papers were revoked. They had to show that they were true citizenships. Where? In Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Ukraine, Italy. They had to show that they were true citizens there, right? Now, so very interesting. All the places they name are close by each other. None of the places they named were at a border. Let's go. Thus cannot be counted as the end of the earth. Right? That stuff is around Russia. Let's look at this. So check your political map of Europe. So this is Belgium. We got France. We got Germany, where they named, Italy, Poland, Russia, and the Ukraine. All of them are in the same proximity, the same area. The word says Yahuwah will bring a what? Distant nation against you from the end of the earth, and it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand. So, for this to be accurate for them, it would have to be the United States of America coming all the way across to come into Germany, Italy, Poland, Russia, Spain, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and demanding for the so-called Jewish people to be handed over to them so they can torture them. That's what will have to happen. Something from the end of the earth, from where they're at. If they are in Germany, Italy, Poland, Russia, Spain, Ukraine, at the time when this stuff is taking place, it doesn't count towards biblical prophecy. So just as this Middle East map shows, this is not the end of the earth for those who live here. So any kind of Assyria, anything Babylonian captivity, Assyrian captivity, any kind of captivity over in the Middle East would not count, because this is not coming from the ends of the earth. And Father said he was going to make a wasteland of Egypt. So this won't count. Not this Egypt. All right. So the Holocaust isn't scripturally sound. Why? Because neither can Germany, Poland, Russia, Ukraine be considered as the end of the earth for those who live there. None of these count for the prophecy. None. September 1939 to May 14, 1948 is not 400 years. So now that it's been proven that those who call themselves Jewish cannot be who they say they are, the scriptures must match the scenario, which theirs do not. It doesn't come even close to a match. Yahuwah never decreed how many would die, only how the enemy nation would come. This should be the focus. Everything else is a smokescreen, an illusion to what others want you to believe concerning the fulfillment of the 400-year prophecy and the true identity of Yahuwah's people Israel. So, what happened was this. It's just like a movie. They make a motive and they try to find a way to get sympathy for those who are being attacked, if it makes sense. So that way when you see the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, who call themselves Jewish, making big moves, no one would say anything or stand against it. Why? Because they'll say, those are Yah's chosen people. So we're not supposed to say anything because that's Yah's chosen people. And if you say anything against them, you're going to be destroyed. And that is the implications. So they had to take that look or take that masquerade or take that mask on to do what they was called to do by their master. Let's go. So let's look at the contenders of those who call themselves Jewish. What will their story reveal or unveil? Remember, truth is not biased, it's absolute. So we got a people who is contending to be the true people of Israel. We're going to take a look and see what their story will reveal. Let's go. Deuteronomy chapter 28. And it shall come to pass that as Yahuwah rejoiced over you to do you good, and to multiply you, so Yahuwah will rejoice over you to destroy you, and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. The word plucked means plucked, take hold of, quickly remove it from its place. She plucked a blade of grass. Remove, pick off, pick, pull, pull off, extract, take off, catch hold of, and pull quickly. That's almost like a motion of being kidnapped. Plucked. You will be kidnapped. She plucked his sleeves. Pull, tug, clutch, snatch, take hold of, grab, seize, catch, tweak, twitch, jerk, to prepare it for cooking. Understand, you are to remove the feathers from. So this is going to be a plucking motion going on. There's going to be some kidnapping taking place. This definition of swoop. Move rapidly downwards through the air, like a motion of people jumping on you. Dive, sweep, pounce, drop, plummet, plunge. Get it? Swooping motion. This is all. She swooped up the hand in her arms. Someone grabbing you. You're being kidnapped. Pluck and swoop. I love these. I love the word. It makes everything so graphic. And that's why I'm saying every single word the way I'm saying it. So you can see it in motion. You're being plucked. You're being grabbed. You're being apprehended. But guess what? You don't know what's taking place. You're being attacked. Assaulted. Ooh. Now, when they talked in the videos about what took place with them, they was coherent. It was no kidnapping going on. They was well aware of Hitler saying, look, y'all need to produce papers. If you can't produce papers, something bad's going to happen to you. They're well aware, they're conscious of hearing what's about to take place. They say what? They brought out trucks or vans and told them to get into it. They got into it. Other people were being plucked against their will. They didn't have a choice. They're being drugged somewhere, tugged somewhere. These people are literally walking into a van. Understand? All right. Deuteronomy 28. You will serve your enemies whom Yahuwah will send against you. You will be left hungry, thirsty, naked, and lacking in everything. Yahuwah will put an iron yoke on your neck, oppressing you harshly until he has destroyed you. Another thing, it says a nation from the ends of the earth will do this. At the time when this attack is taking place, for the so-called Jewish people, they're and it's the Germans there, just like them, who are coming against them because they call themselves Jewish. Yoke of iron upon thy neck. Yoke of iron upon thy neck. All right, now look. Hitler could have been mad because of the deal that was made with Britain, with the British. That's what he got upset about. And so he probably got upset about it in the scene that he was double-crossed or was backstabbed. So then he was like, all right, let's find all the people who are Jewish. And you start hearing them in different speeches saying like, these people are evil. They're evil, can't be trusted. Why is he saying that? You just got through saying it in the video, showing you that it was a deal made with the Rothschilds and with the British to what? To actually start the war in Germany, to literally cause everything to take place, and then after for the British to lose the war to America, right? And then after Hitler sees like what took place, it was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I've been dubbed. I feel stupid. Come here. Anyone who called themselves Jewish people, that any of amongst us? All right, let's get them. And he's taking his anger out on them for him being turned into a fool. And he considers these people to be untrustworthy. Needs to be destroyed. Let's go. So swoop down and plucked. You see this what's going on right here? Plucked. Now, there's white people right here. That is helping with the swoop down and being plucked from the land. They're there ordering it, causing it to happen. It's not just happening. They're giving orders for these things to be taking place. A nation is coming against them that they don't even speak the language of. $49.50. Yahuwah will bring a distant nation against you from the end of the earth, and it will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand, a fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect for the old and no pity for the young. The Canary Islands, Italy, Spain, Italy. They're on the other end of the earth. Let's see how that works out with scripture. How it all began. Slavery in Virginia, 1619. That's what they say. All right. Dutch ship is blown off course coming from the Caribbean islands in Jamestown. Traded black slaves for supplies to make it home. Slaves just another commodity to trade. You were collateral. By 1640, slavery in Virginia was based on race. Slaves were then born into slavery. Slavery becomes a major part of the economy of the South. So you're building up the South. You're building up America. You're building up everywhere you go. You are building it up. Just want to put that in there real quick. From an economic standpoint, slavery worked. Remember, there were no machines to work plantations, farms like we have today. Slavery was cheaper in the long run, but more expensive in the short term. Slavery quickly spread to other colonies, even northern ones, but was critical to the success of the agriculture colonies of the South. Don't ever let no one tell you that you're not valuable. Our people literally built up the four corners of the earth. Without the slaves, they wouldn't have the wealth that they have at all. So let nobody tell you lazy. Don't let nobody tell that you ain't good for nothing. You can always tell them, my ancestors built this, and you didn't pay them one red dime. In fact, when you was done with them, you hit them in the head with a hammer. You killed them. So how dare you speak to me in that manner? That's anti-Shemitic. For Yahuwah will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to the other. That means the four corners of the earth. Like everywhere. You are going everywhere. All right, let's look at this video. These are all the places where we were scattered. Look. So far, this is tying in with scripture. Being attacked while you in Germany, and you are yourself a German, does not make sense. Being attacked while you in Hungary, and you yourself are Hungarian, does not make sense. This makes sense. But just people just don't want to admit the truth. But today, you're going to see it in your face. It's going to be undeniable in your face. It's a lot of slave ships. A lot of slaves, or a lot of people leaving from the land, being dispersed throughout the four corners of the earth. A lot of movement, a lot of building up America, building up the four corners of the ends of the earth. It's four corners. It's being built up, but it's an even sadder story to this. Seeing all these people that's leaving from this land, swooped down, kidnapped. They're not willingly coming. All of them are being kidnapped. Families. It's about to get sadder. Let's go. Here we are again from the end or border of the earth.
The transatlantic slave trade basically begins in the early 1500s, and initially it's run by the Spanish and the Portuguese, who were the first people to explore the West African coast beginning in the late 1400s. And they begin bringing slaves at the start of the 1500s to their colonies in the New World, and then the other nations all follow suit.
The transatlantic slave trade involved the forced migration of an estimated 11 to 14 million people from the African continent to various points in the Americas. People were purchased from West Africa as well as the hinterlands in Central Africa and as far east as the east coast of the African continent. One of the things that we know is that the process of the transatlantic slave trade rested on the idea of commodification. That is, transforming African captives, transforming people into property. And this process happened through a number of mechanisms. First and foremost, it happened through the inhumane treatment of African captives. As European merchants on the African continent purchased large groups of African men, women, and children from disparate regions, linguistic groups, religious groups, cultural and ethnic groups, there was a process by which people were treated not as people, but as property. So, for example, people were separated from their linguistic groups, separated from friends and relatives, separated from people from similar cultural and regional backgrounds. And this separation of people was intended to create a sense of isolation, a sense of dislocation, and was also created with the intent of preventing rebellion, preventing people from organizing and rising up against European and some African merchants who were trafficking in human captives. African captives who were placed on slaving vessels were often branded, right, with a hot iron brand of the trading company that purchased them. So a way of marking them as property and then identifying them as the property of a particular trading firm.
And they're often chained up, often with like pieces of wood that they'd have their neck chained to and then be connected to another person. And they'd be marched in what's known as a slave coffle to the coast. They get to the coast and they get put in these kind of warehouses for slaves known as slave factories. And these are big slave fortresses or castles, kind of like a prison. And they may hold hundreds of slaves at a time. And then when a slave ship arrives, they are then sold to the captain of the slave ship.
African captives on slave trading vessels were generally held below the deck. We know that they were held in cramped quarters. People were forced to live in their own waste and excrement. People were deprived rations. We know, for example, from the journals of ship's captains and ship's doctors and the crews of slaving vessels that most merchants and ship's captains engaged in a very precise calculus to determine how much food and water was required to sustain a bare minimum of life among African captives. So the voyage known as the Middle Passage, this voyage that enslaved captives were forced to take from the West African coast to points in the Americas, could last anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the wind conditions and the currents at sea. During this time, most of the time, people were chained together. People were chained to berths beneath the hold, so in cramped, airless, dark, filthy conditions. The few survivors who wrote narratives, who wrote first-person accounts of their experiences in the Middle Passage, testify to the inhumane and brutal conditions that people endured. They testify to the death at sea. We can estimate that a few million people who were exported from the African continent never made it to the Americas, right? So probably somewhere from 2 to 4 million people died during that voyage. There are accounts from ship's captains of sharks circling and following the slaving vessels, waiting for the bodies of the deceased. Sometimes bodies of living rebels were thrown overseas. So there's a real sense that this was an incredibly traumatic, brutal, and deadly experience for African captives.
Some slaves would try to resist by starving themselves to death, refuse to eat. In those cases, slave traders had special metal devices that they would stick into their mouths and then open up these prongs so they could force feed them by holding their mouths open. Of course, other slaves openly rebelled. They estimate that about 1 out of every 10 slave ships had some sort of violent revolt, usually not a large-scale revolt, but at least some sort of physical violence.
When slaving vessels arrived in the Americas, their first port of entry was usually in the West Indies, in places like Jamaica and Barbados. And from there, captives would be sold to other merchants as well as to West Indian slaveholders, who then sold those captives to North American slaveholders.
Ultimately, the domestic slave trade within the United States becomes kind of another form of the Middle Passage. And so this is when slaves in places like Virginia, where they have a surplus of labor, are being sold further south to places like Louisiana, where there's a huge demand for labor because of the cotton and the sugar and the very profitable crops that they're growing there. And sometimes these slaves are being marched overland, again in these coffles, kind of chained together. Other times they're put on ships and will kind of sail around the coast, sailing around Florida to New Orleans. And New Orleans becomes this kind of hub of the domestic slave trade, and they're then kind of dispersed throughout the Cotton South.
Yep. I would say that counts. We had 2 to 4 million slaves that didn't make it, that was thrown overboard. We had other places where slaves were dispersed throughout the 4 corners of the earth because they were the collateral. So if they go and get some supplies for the ships, well, now they ain't got money to pay for it. Guess who's they gonna pay with it? The slaves. Got another video.
The following summary will illustrate the basics of the transatlantic slave trade. Until it was banned by the English Parliament in 1789 and the United States in 1808, it could be said that it was divided into about 8 steps. The map shows that the slave trade formed a triangle in the Atlantic Ocean. At the top of the triangle were either the shipping ports of Bristol, Rhode Island, New York, or Liverpool, England. The slave ships left their ports with rum, guns, knives, textiles, and jewelry, and would proceed to the Windward Coast, Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, or Slave Coast of Africa for trading for slaves. From West Africa to the West Indies, it was called the Middle Passage, a trip of varying length but about 7 weeks. At the Caribbean ports of Havana and Jamaica, slaves are bartered and traded. Sugar or molasses are purchased to ship back to the United States or Great Britain to be turned back into rum, and the triangle starts all over again. So step 1 is when African tribal leaders routinely kidnap men, women, and children from their neighboring tribes and villages in raids. This is called panniering. The slaves of the famous Amistad were kidnapped in this way from Sierra Leone in 1839. This was made into a movie. Their leader, Sinke, never saw his wife again. Step 2. The African tribal leaders then sell their kidnapped collection to the Portuguese, Spanish, English, or to the New Yankees. Step 3. The captured slaves are marched to the ports on the slave coast in coffles and chains of slaves, chained or yoked together at the neck with forked wooden sticks. Marches sometimes lasted weeks. Step 4. Slaves are taken and collected to be exhibited to the slave traders at the slave castles or fortresses to wait for slave ships to arrive. Step 5. Slave ships, slavers as they are called, are fully packed from 200 up to 900 and sail to the major slave harbors or ports in the West Indies, Brazil, or Lisbon. Havana, Cuba was the largest slave port in the world. However, before they got across the Middle Passage to the West Indies, the sick and dying slaves are routinely thrown overboard, or if there is a shortage of food due to the voyage taking too long. Step 6. Slave traders, or buyers barter for slaves or buy them at auction. Step 7. Slaves are now shipped into their final destination in the colonies or to British, Dutch, French, or Portuguese colonies. Brazil, the largest Portuguese colony, received 4 million slaves during the 17th to 19th centuries. In the 18th century, Virginia received more than 45,000 slaves, and Charleston, South Carolina, about 65,500 slaves before the slave trade became illegal. It should be noted that due to diseases, running out of food and water, just dying of heat, or bad air and ship captains, it is more to their advantage to toss these slaves, which can be 20 to 30% overboard, and collect on their insurance from underwriters of the ships. Step 9. Finally, the slaves that did survive the Middle Passage and the trip up from the colonies were put to use. There is one example of the slave trade gone bad that should be long remembered. The Zong had picked up its full load of slaves of 442 in September 1781 at the Portuguese island of San Tomé, lost its way in the West Indies, mistaking Santo Domingo for Jamaica, and ran out of food and water. Captain Collinswood, to save face, decided to throw 195 of the 442 into the sea on some pretext that the charge to the underwriters with the loss. 10 jumped overboard on their own, leaving a little more than half left over for sale. Historians believe that it was this sort of antics that brought about the first serious discussions about the abolition of the slave trade, which did occur in the English Parliament in 1789.
Wow. A lot of bad stuff happening to these people. But it seems to be matching up scripturally all the way around. Let's go. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Again, you will serve your enemies whom Yahuwah will send against you. You will be left hungry, thirsty, naked, and lacking in everything. Yahuwah will put an iron yoke on your neck, oppressing you harshly until he has destroyed you.